Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is now at 5:30 on July the 9th. I'm Ken Mahalik, the chair of the Financial Administration Audit Committee, and we will call this meeting to order. Here at RTD, safety is a core value, and I'll begin with a brief safety moment or safety briefing. If we have a medical emergency and 911 needs to be called, I will ask our RTD General Counsel to make that call. Any medically trained individuals in the room are respectfully requested to assist. And if needed, an AED is in the glass case located just outside this room on the wall to the right. And in the event we must evacuate the building for fire or any other reason, please calmly exit out the door you came in at the back of the room, go up the stairs to the first floor, around the security desk, and exit through the front door, likely the one you came in. Police and security officers will be there to direct you to a safe meetup area. Anyone requiring special assistance in the event of said evacuation will be assisted by RTD staff as necessary. And while RTD takes every precaution to ensure the security of its passengers, vehicles, facilities, the agency relies on both staff and the general public to be aware of and alert to any suspicious or dangerous activity on buses and trains and around stations, stops, and platforms. As such, I'd encourage all RTD employees and patrons to download the RTD Transit Watch app. We'll talk about that a little more later on this evening. And this allows users to report suspicious or dangerous activity and communicate directly with RTD transit security personnel on a real-time basis in the event of an emergency situation. And this is available on the various app sites. We have this evening 2 recommended actions. The first reads as such. It is recommended by the Financial Administration and Audit Committee that the Board of Directors adopt resolution number blank series of 2019 to amend and appropriate funds for the proposed 2019 amended budget, to decrease the appropriation by $49.1 million to $1,267 million, and to decrease the appropriation of capital carry forward, previously approved capital funds, by $140 million to $579,500,000, as detailed below in the discussion section of this board report. This recommended action supports the following general manager's goals: core goal number 3 of strong financial management, and task goal number 1 of fiscal sustainability. Is there a motion? Thank you, Director Williams and Director Whitmore. And Heather, I know you can summarize this best out of anybody.
Yes, so actually I'm going to have Jeanette Scarpino do a summary.
Well, Jeanette
she can summarize it even better than I can summarize it. But she will point out some pertinent information that you need to know before you approve the budget. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Jeanette.
Thank you. So let me give you a timeline here. The 2019 adopted budget was approved in November of last year. Now we amend for necessary changes and we reappropriate the budget based on current information, and we begin developing the 2020 budget in August. In fact, we've already started that process. So your board report on page 6 has a summary of the district-wide appropriation. Now, these are our operating expenses, debt service, capital expenditures, and fund balances. In total, we are showing a $189 million decrease to the appropriation for the district, and this is made up of a $49 million decrease to the general appropriation and a $140 million decrease to the capital carry forward. A summary of the revenue sources for the district you will find on page 7. I'll remind you that revenue is not appropriated, it is estimated. And these summary tables use Exhibit 1 as their data source. Exhibit 1 is on page 25, and this is where we present the budget in a financial statement format. So with respect to operating expenses, on the base system, we are budgeting operating expenses to decline $7.6 million. And this comes from a $13.6 million intentional reduction that we made in order to balance the midterm financial plan. We also made some reductions to the expense carry forward in order to correct some dollars there. And this reduction is offset by increases to expenses in various areas that are largely unavoidable, including repair work, security contract increases, processing fees for mobile ticketing. We are also restoring the general manager's contingency fund. For Fast Track's project, operating expenses will decrease $27.3 million, and this is due to corrections, realignment of capitalized salaries, adjustments to project budgets. We are also transferring the rubber tire service increase from Fast Track's project to Fast Track's operations because that's really where it belongs. For Fast Track's operations, the operating expenses will increase $27.8 million, and this is, again, due to the transfer of the rubber tire service increase from Fast Track's project. We are also restoring about $3.8 million in funding from 2018 for North Metro. And I would refer you to attachment A on page 16 for the detail of these changes from the adopted to the amended budget. Regarding new capital, it is summarized on attachment B, and we are showing a combined increase of $2.6 million from the adopted. This is made up of a $900,000 increase on the base system and a $1.8 million increase on Fast Tracks, largely from project expenses on Southeast Rail Extension and North Metro. The capital carry forward, it is in the amended budget where we update the carry forward balance to the December 31st, 2018 actuals. This is summarized on attachment C. We are showing a decrease of $140 million district-wide due to project changes and completion of projects. Our major carry-forward projects on the base system, 16th Street Mall paver repair, Colfax Avenue Transit Priority Project, and the purchase of 27 light rail vehicles for Fast Tracks. Our major carry-forward projects are closeout of our recent Fast Tracks projects and North Metro costs. I want to talk a little bit about revenue because on a combined basis, we are showing a decrease of $18 million. And this is coming from a lower sales and use tax projection and grant revenue forecast. And although we are projecting sales and use tax to be up 4.4% over 2018 per the CU Lead's March forecast, this forecast is down from 5.6% that we used in the adopted budget. And this translates to a decrease of $5.9 million from the adopted budget. Also, grant revenue is down, or we project to be down, $12.3 million from an overall decrease in federal and state grants, offset by increases in capital maintenance grants. Fair revenue, we are budgeting no change from the adopted. Investment income, no change, and other income will be up slightly. So with revenue down, any net increase to expenses in this amended budget will be supported by other funding sources. And these include a reduction in both expense and capital carry forward amounts, release of unspent funds from closure of capital projects, the intentional reduction, as I mentioned, to the 2019 budgeted operating expenses, deferral of certain projects to 2020, the year 2020, and all of this will support any net increase to expenses. The budget is balanced. We have balanced it out in the midterm financial plan, which I will talk about a little bit later. and that is an important to note. The unrestricted year-end fund balance, we are forecasting that to be $19.3 million on a district-wide basis. This is a reduction from the adopted because we are restating it on a cash basis to match the cash basis balance in the midterm financial plan. So in summary, district-wide, we are seeing a decrease in the overall appropriation of $189 million from reductions in capital carryforward and operating expenses. We're seeing an overall decrease to revenue of $18 million, but other funding sources will cover any net increase to our expenses. We are seeing an overall decrease to operating expenses of $12 million. Our reserve fund balances will be stable, and our unrestricted fund balance is restated to $19.3 million. So we will request approval at next week's board meeting, and happy to take questions.
Director Cook.
Just one quick one that came up after we talked. In the midterm financial plan, it talks about grants, federal grants being recognized as awarded, and but here we show a decline of $12 million in the amended budget, and you may have touched on this, but I just would have missed it. I wanted to just inquire why we would see less in grant revenue than was recognized.
The midterm financial plan is updated for the amended budget, so it should mirror the budgeted grant revenue. And then we typically increase the grant revenue at a modest rate in the midterm financial plan going forward. There's a little bit of we think there's a bit of a slowdown in receipt of grant funding, which is causing this decline. A little bit lower than what we've seen in previous years, but again, we have forecasted it and mirrored it in the midterm financial plan.
So when you say recognized as awarded, it's not necessarily the case that we have the known amount at that point? I was just trying to figure that part out.
Yes, that is a correct statement. So when we look at getting our operating grants and other grants that we get on a regular basis based on our NTD information that we put in, it's always a couple years in arrears, and also they have been they adjust the amount of money that they have available each year through the appropriations piece of it. So we make the best estimate we can based on things that we are eligible for. So we don't estimate things that we haven't received in the past or that we're not eligible to receive, but the amount might actually vary by year based on what we actually get and what Congress actually appropriates.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for the hard work of paring down on these budgets.
Thank you, Director Cook. Any other? Yes, Director Lewis.
I just have a few quick questions. And I want to thank you all because you helped me to understand these budgets and these numbers, and I really appreciate the way you break these down. So on page 7, paragraph 3, it says, or not page 7, reclassify certain capital programs. Can you tell me what that means, does?
I'm sorry, what page are you on in your packet?
It's packet page 7, and it's in the...
We have charts on our page 7.
Oh, okay.
Ours has a bullet titled 2019 Operating Expense Adjustments.
Okay, that's what you're looking at? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And it just says reclassify certain capital programs, and I just didn't know what that meant, and I was hoping you could tell me what that means.
Reclassify certain capital programs.
We're looking for it, sorry.
For it, yeah.
Okay, sorry that this doesn't line up.
Where is it on that page?
Okay, I just lost it.
Do you know which paragraph it is on that?
Yeah.
Under
one second.
2019 operating expenses?
I'm sorry, I just lost it. Sorry, I write this stuff down in my notebook and just put a number next to it. All right, I'll move to the next question because I can't find it, but I am curious as to what that means.
We will look for it and try to answer.
Okay, I'm giving you another page, and I don't know if this is helpful. It's our packet, page 16.
Okay. Is there a heading on the top of the page?
It starts with the safety, security, and asset management.
Got it, yeah.
And I was looking at the bus operations, and it looks like there's a significant reduction in that area, and I just was hoping you could talk me through that.
Right, the $1.6 million reduction for bus ops. This was part of a requested reduction to operating expenses in the 2019 budget in order to balance this amended budget. We asked for a fairly significant reduction from all departments, and this is bus's contribution to that.
Yeah, that's pretty significant.
Yes,
compared to
it was a significant request.
Yeah.
So
Does that? Oh, go ahead.
Just, so if you look at each of the items, you will see that in most areas. So like under communications, 593,000, under finance and administration, 3.1. I just want to mention that's like a really high percentage reduction. 600,000 under general counsel. So, so in the percentage of the total operations budget, it's a very, very, very small percentage.
I guess the reason I asked about it is because I think one of the things that keeps coming up is that we don't have enough bus operators and mechanics, and so I was just making sure that what we are approving in terms of our budget reflects our values and what we say here.
So, yes, let me address that. So this is not in personal services.
Okay.
And that wouldn't be our issue. We have sufficient funds to hire the people. It's a matter of actually getting those people to apply and then hiring them and retaining them. So this reduction is in operations, not in salaries, benefits, and wages.
That was my follow-up question,
Yes.
so thank you for anticipating that. And, oh, I did want to say thanks. I don't know if you had anything to do with it. The roof over at Platt. So when Director Catlin and I went on the tour, that was one of the things that they talked about. So it's exciting to see that that made it into this budget. So thank you.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. Just in case anybody else wants to know, that's been on our state of good repair list for a while. And then we were able to apply for some grants last year, and we were able to actually get a significant grant to help us, which then freed up some money for us to apply to the other East Metro roof also. So it's a good snowball effect that happened. So
Well done. Thank you.
much needed.
Thank you, Director Lewis. I don't see anybody else lined up in the queue, so we will go ahead and vote. Director Williams, you were the mover. Director Whitmore, you were the second. And the amended budget passes 14 yeses and 1 no, the 1 no being Director Minton. And we will move on to our second of 2 recommended actions. It is recommended by the Financial Administration and Audit Committee that the Board of Directors adopt the First Amendment to the RTD Salaried Employees Defined Contribution, or DC Plan, effective January 1st, 2014. This recommended action supports the following General Manager's goals. Core goal number 3 of strong financial management.
Move approval.
Thank you, Directors Broom and Catlin. It's all you, Heather.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through all the detail because I'll take questions if there's anything that is confusing, but I wanted to let you know why the board's approving this. So as you know, we have trustees that sit on this particular pension plan, and two of those trustees are board members, so Director Broom and Director Lubow. But the board itself, when it comes to the salaried pension plan, has the ultimate authority to approve these actions. So I just wanted to let you know why we're bringing it. The trustees did approve this unanimously at our last meeting. We feel that the adjustments here will help the plan financially and has limited impact on the employees in changing the parameters of the permanent break in service, and also the forfeiting of the money that's in the escrow accounts and then applying that to cover fees and expenses of the plan, which then reduces RTD's contribution, not by a huge amount, but it does reduce it. So, and we currently have about $900,000 sitting in these escrow accounts that would be freed up and then could be applied to use towards those expenses in the plan. So with that, I'd be glad to take any specific questions.
Any questions? Director Minton?
Yes, thank you. Has the amount ever gone much over that balance that was presented?
I don't know the answer to that. As long as I've been here, it's hovered around this amount. So remember, it hasn't been out there that long. It's been since 2009. So this is looking back the last 5 years that makes up that 900,000. Most of the employees have rather small amounts in there because this is just money for employees that have left before they're vested for the 5 years. I did look at the list, and there are 79 former employees that fit into that category. We did look in the past to see how many times an employee had come back within that 5-year period of time, and that has happened one time since 2009.
Okay, and since this is fairly new for us, there is no legal issue where, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, that it would go to the state treasurer and the treasurer has it in the, goes
No.
back to, in any way like that. There's
And
no
we have a
complication.
lawyer that supports the trustees. Steve Weinstein is our attorney there. But no, because this particular money, if you are not vested, you're not entitled to it. Once you're vested, you are entitled to your share of it. So, but this is all money where they're not vested and per the bylaws could not receive the money.
All right, thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Director Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. Heather, you're doing a really good job of anticipating my questions and answering them before I ask you them. So well done, because I was going to ask about the 79 participants and how often that has occurred in the past few years. A question that I do have for you is, have you all had conversations with folks that are employed by RTD about what this, like how this impacts them?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again?
Yep. So of the folks who work within RTD, I know they wouldn't be impacted by this, but have you had conversations with current employees and proposed this or put this proposal forward to them and asked for feedback or input?
No, so with current employees, we have not. Now, we are conducting once a year listening sessions and update sessions. So we had the last one, was it March, I want to say? I can't remember. Where the trustees were there along with the financial advisors and our actuarial to answer questions.
Mm-hmm.
That had not been done, as I understand, in a very long time.
Okay.
And we've committed to doing that annually. But we typically would not present these plan changes to them. These would not affect, again, employees that are already vested. It will affect employees that leave before they're vested. But no, we have not reached out to them and had asked their opinion.
I'm just curious if there's any opportunity to do so. I'd hate to impact.
Well, there could be. I mean, there's always an opportunity
blindsided.
to do so. I think as trustees, that's our job, is to make sure that we're listening to employees and that we're bringing back those concerns, and then that we're disseminating that information once it's approved. That's why we have trustees that sit on that versus a vote. So we could do it, but we didn't have any intent of doing it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in you all pursuing that. I also was curious of this solution, why this one? So why not 1 year or 2 years, 3, 4, 5? Like, how did you arrive from reducing it from 5 years to 1?
That was a recommendation in looking at the history of when people left and when they returned.
Got it.
And so what we looked at is, from a financial standpoint, Most of the people that returning within, and there's only been one within that 1 year period of time.
That's a long time.
The other thing is, it's unique to this plan that they're reinstated once they return, even within that 5 year or now the 1 year period. So that is unique to this plan, and so we made this adjustment to be more similar to what the other plans that are like this out there.
Okay.
It's a very generous plan.
Yeah. Last question, I promise it really is. So within this document, there's within the resolution, there's a paragraph that's been struck out, and I'm just curious, aside from maybe it's saying Phil A. Washington, and you're obviously not Phil, why this paragraph was struck out?
Because it doesn't apply to the current general manager. That was something that was negotiated for a particular general manager, and it just was not eliminated once that general manager, the contract that this board has negotiated with our current general managers does not have these provisions.
So this is not the most updated one, or it is the most updated one?
No, this is the most updated one, taking that information out.
And so there's something separate that would apply to general manager?
Correct.
Genova?
He has a
Okay.
contract between you and the board and himself.
That's why
that
this was
specifies
removed.
this, right?
Got it. Thank you so much.
And these particular items do not apply to his contract.
Because his name's not Phil Washington?
Well, not only that, but he doesn't get the benefit that Phil got.
Okay, thank you. Seeing nobody else in the queue, we will move to a vote. Director Broom, you remember you were the mover, and Director Catlin, you were the second. And as before, this passes 14 yeses, 1 no, the 1 no being Director Lewis. And we will move on to our handful of updates this evening.
So the first update is the second draft of the midterm financial plan, which we can now present to you because we have an amended budget information. So with that, Jeanette's going to touch on, and this will be the base portion of it. We still have some work to do on the fast tracks portion of it, but Jeanette's going to walk you through our latest update.
Is this supposed to work?
It did.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Midterm financial plan, as you know, the midterm financial plan is developed separately for base and fast tracks, and then brought together in a long-term financial plan. The components, fiscal management, continued building of reserves, maintain service levels for bus and light rail systems, O&M of completed projects, state of good repair of facilities and equipment, opportunities for diesel fuel lock. I want to spend a minute here on prioritization of capital and expense projects. You will be seeing the second draft of the midterm financial plan. And this second draft for the base system adds capital and expense project requests identified as high priority by the executive team. The second draft is also updated with the amended budget, and the prior $88 million gap that you saw in the first draft has now been reduced to $32 million over the 6-year period. We did that by eliminating, reducing, or deferring many of the project requests to future years. Oh, sorry. Our variables, our uncontrollable variables, with respect to sales and use tax revenue, we have to adjust to lower forecasts. Fuel price volatility, it will be with us from now until eternity. The futures price is $2.15 for 2020. I got that number yesterday. I think that's somewhat encouraging. With respect to ridership, we will be reporting on that a little bit later. The revenue assumptions, we are assuming a 10% fair rate increase in 2022 and 2025 per board policy. That seemed to be the consensus. Sales and use tax, per CU leads, their macro forecasts for economic indicators are generally lower for 2019 compared to earlier forecasts. And here we show the baseline forecast for the 6-year period. Then, of course, our chart. Revenue assumptions. Let me say that with respect to debt financing, we're not issuing new debt to finance fleet acquisition or construction in the current plan, this second draft, but new debt may be issued to finance fleet acquisition or construction, and you may see that in the final draft. Expenditure assumptions, the inflation rate that we are using on our ongoing expenses is 2.6% in 2020. We are showing, with respect to the Fast Tracks midterm financial plan, O&M of completed Fast Tracks corridors, the North Metro commuter rail costs, Eagle costs based on the concession agreement, and state of good repair needs on the base system. That has not changed from the earlier draft. And again, with respect to project and capital expenditures, approximately $32 million of reductions in projects, both capital and expense, or other expenses will be necessary in the base system second draft if we cannot identify other funding sources. Our reserve assumptions, we are maintaining a planned moderate increase to our fund balances for both the base system and Fast Tracks. Our goal is a combined 3 months of O&M costs in the 3 reserves. We want these reserve balances to be sufficient to withstand economic fluctuations, and we have said that the base system reaches this goal after 2025, but Fast Tracks maintains this goal through the 6-year period. And here, of course, is the cash flow. I will point you to line 37, which is the unrestricted year-end fund balance. You can see that it's positive over the time period. I said earlier that we did balance the amended budget in the midterm financial plan, and the first column that reads amended budget, you can see that the unrestricted year-end fund balance, line 37, is $3.2 million. So that tells me the amended budget is balanced. The midterm financial plan is balanced. However, if you look at line 6, that is the adjustment that we will need to make to balance the plan, and it totals $32 million. So graphically, for the year 2020, base source of funds totals $684.8 million. Base use of funds totals $682.8 million. The difference of the sources and uses is $2 million, which is the unrestricted year-end fund balance for the year 2020. With respect to Fast Tracks, there are no changes since our previous update when we showed you the first draft, so we are not showing Fast Tracks cash flow this evening. It does need some additional work. All of the assumptions listed there are the same, but I will note that the next draft will be presented when the base midterm financial plan is balanced. And then we will finalize the Fast Tracks midterm financial plan and present it at that time. Opportunities and challenges. And finally, next steps. In August, we will present the next draft of the midterm financial plan for both base and Fast Tracks, and as well as the first draft long-range financial plan. On September 17th, we will present the final drafts, as well as the 2020 requested budget. September 24th, we will ask for adoption of the midterm and long-range financial plans. And then in November, we will present the 2020 recommended budget for adoption. Are there questions? Get this away from me.
Director Broom.
Thank you, Chair. How long has the district had the policy to increase fares by 10% every 3-year period?
As long as I've been here, which is going on 9 years. Can somebody else speak to that in terms of how long that's been?
Well, I wanted to mention first, it's not necessarily 10%. It's the accumulation of what inflation would have been over that 3-year period, which since we run about 3 to a 3 1/3, it just happens to have been lately the 10%, so.
Okay, the reason I ask, I mean, you read in the paper every day that Federal Reserve is having a terrible time trying to reach 2%. I guess maybe the Denver CPI maybe is a little higher than the federal, but you also mentioned that you used 2.6% for future costs increase. So I don't know, maybe we should revisit the 10% and at some point in time and reaffirm whether that's appropriate or not. Thank you.
And 1988.
Thank you. Director Minton?
Before I go to the subject I signed up to speak for, I'm going to say I know that in like my second year on the board, we changed the policy from 1 year every year to every 3 years. So that would have been probably 2013 or 2014. That portion changed. Just for your background on that. I did vote no. But anyway, what I'm wondering is on packet page, the numbers page, packet page 50. This is the second draft, and it gives us categories. What would be the best way for me to get the line items that have built these figures?
So you want the detail behind every line item?
Yes, please.
That might take a little while, but we...
Probably best for you and I to meet offline. I'd be happy to go through that with you, if that would make some sense. If you want to go through every line item, you bet.
Whatever fits your time better. Yes, that's what I would like to see, is details, please. Okay. That is all that I had. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Chair. Following Director Broom's comment, you made the statement that it seemed to be the consensus that the every 3 years we would raise it 10%. And I seem to recall that at previous committee meetings, a number of us board members have raised concerns about that assumption and even asked that we look at scenarios where we did not assume that increase. And so I'm not sure that the phrase, "this seemed to be the consensus," is accurate, because I know a number of us are concerned about those every 3-year fare increases.
So maybe consensus wasn't the right word, but we felt that we heard after presenting it last time that the direction is that we needed to include those every 3 years per the current fiscal policy, and that it could be reviewed when the fiscal policy is reviewed each year in the fall.
Thank you. You did say that. I just wanted to remind everybody.
Okay.
That it's not a fait accompli.
Okay, thank you. Director Rivera-Malpiede.
Thank you, Chair. I want to agree with Director Broom and Director Catlin as well in terms of looking at this 10% increase. It is a real concern. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Ditto to what everyone has said. That's all I was going to say.
Director Geisinger.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I've sort of wondered if I understood why we supported, moving forward with this with the midterm financial plan, but I think you're hearing it now that there's a lot of concern about raising fares, and certainly 10% every 3 years at some point becomes unsustainable.
Okay, well, it sounds like we'll have a chance in a couple of months to reevaluate that when we look at the fiscal policy. Next, Director Lubow.
Thank you, Chair. I want to reiterate the concerns that are being raised, and I understand that we need to have a balanced budget, and that's important. But I also know that we are on the upper end of fares nationally, and you can price yourself out of the market. And I think it's very worrisome to think that our model, our economic model, is kind of based on every 3 years increasing. And I would love to see a rethinking of that. And I know it's not going to be easy, but who said this job was easy, really? You know, and I think you're hearing this undercurrent of concern about this policy that assumes that every 3 years we're going to up the rates. It's troubling. I just wanted to add that. Thank you. And I know it's not personal, and but I think it's something we need to think about. Thank you.
If I could just respond to that, we'll be having that conversation. We do the fiscal policy, but keep in mind everything that we've shown you in the long range, which does not balance, and the midterm does not balance, includes those 10% increases. And the fast tracks conversation that we will have coming up, that also includes those increases. So if you take away hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, it will drastically change what you're looking at. And so that was the conversation we had last time, is that I think we weren't prepared to go there, especially when we currently have a policy that says we are to include that. And then once we revisit that policy, which we're expecting to have a lot of discussion about in October, and in fact, I think we've talked about maybe bringing it sooner so that we could have that over a series of a couple months. You'll get to, yeah, it may not happen in 1 month, so we might need a couple months for that discussion, so.
Thank you. Yeah, this may come up again in the ridership update and the past program update as well tonight, so we'll see. Director Walker, you're next.
Thanks. So my recollection when I got on the board was that we were in the midst of a 5-year period where we did not increase fares at all or change fares at all. And the last 2 times we voted on fares, we reduced fares for a good number of our customers, both times in 2015 and this last go-around. So while nobody, you know, it's painful for a lot of people to face a fare increase. That's not all we do. We've also decreased fares. Our fares are expensive, and I see folks get on the bus where I get on, and they get off a few blocks later. And $3 is a long way to go. Is a lot of money for a mile ride or a 2-mile ride, and I understand that. But I've lived in a few cities, and I can't think of one where there's almost 24-hour service, and where somebody can go from end to end of the metro district without having to pay another fare, because most districts aren't as large as we are. So while not everybody needs to take advantage of that, but it's there, and that's something that we need to consider. And like Ms. McKillop said, we have a system that we have to maintain and run, and there are a lot of systems in this country that don't have the money, and they have to cut service because they don't have the revenue. They have to, you know, some of their systems, some components of their systems aren't in the state of good repair because the revenue isn't there. So while I understand the concern about raising funds, we provide a lot of service all day long for that revenue. So I just wanted to give another perspective. I understand. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Folsko, you're next.
Thank you, Chair Mahalik. Thank you, Heather. Jeanette, this is always a difficult situation, and thank you for doing this work. It's incredibly difficult, and I appreciate your effort. You know, when you think about raising the fare, it's just arbitrarily 10%, whatever the rationale behind it is, 10%, but wages don't go up commensurate to that for the people who are working, struggling folks to use our services. On the other hand, some people are more affluent and can afford the full fare. And so it seems to me a balance, and it seems that that's really where the housing crisis comes from as well. Wages aren't going up commensurate with the increase of housing. So your wages went up 5% over the last 5 years. Housing costs went up 70%. And I think it might be prudent for you guys to come back to us and show us what the budget actually looks like with no fare increase. Of course, it just, I think, something to consider. I do think, you know, there is a balance there, and there are places where they could afford an increase of even more than 10% maybe. But then that then supports people who can't afford it. There's a restaurant in Denver called the Same Cafe. It stands for So All May Eat. Have you heard of it? It's on Colfax, near Ray's. And if you can't afford to eat, you can't afford to pay for your meal, it's free. But you can wash dishes, you can sweep the floor, you can do something else. But the people who can afford it pay the full fare, or even more to pay it forward. And so I don't think that's a model that works here, but there's a balance where those who can afford to pay more should, and then that supplements the people who can't. And it's not because they're lazy and they don't work. It's because their wages aren't going up with the expense of living overall, transportation, healthcare, housing, food, et cetera. Thank you.
So Director Folska, we presented that a couple months ago, what it would look like without those 2 fare increases. So we can send that out again to the board so they can review that information again.
Well, with the new situation too, because you've got an amended budget.
Oh, with amended budget, yeah. We could do that too.
Okay, thank you. Director Cook, you're next.
Thanks. I couldn't resist to add my voice in agreement with the idea that we not just accept automatically. But last time this came up, we talked about maybe tweaking the assumption to mean not just say we'll have an increase, but maybe a fare revenue increase, not necessarily accomplished by way of a fare increase. But that didn't sound like that would work for your projections. But I still think ridership presents, in the words of a friend of mine, low-hanging fruit in some cases, some places, for some significant level of increase in revenue. And we're seeing that, the potency of that, with the fare revenue increases we're seeing in spite of system-wide decreases in ridership. And I think that's attributable mainly to the commuter rail, if I'm not mistaken. So just focusing on that and developing a strategy for increasing or optimizing those revenues where they might be available. I'd like to see that alongside the assumption with that you're carrying forward about the fare increases, if we have to do those. So, thank you.
And if I could just add, we have done that calculation of what type of ridership increases would need to take place to make up for that revenue, so we can present that information. It's significant. Yeah.
Thank you. Director Williams?
Thank you, Chairman Halleck. I think that Heather would agree, and Director Malpiedi, that a lot of this work was done as part of the past program working group that led up to what is now the LIVE program. A lot of these numbers were crunched and presented and reviewed by a large group of people who were highly vested in this. And I think that we have to give the program a chance to get its feet on the ground and get rolled out into the community until we actually get to see how some of this plays out, how the fares that we have now and the discounts that we are offering work. And I think that we will also see some effects in ridership based on that. But we need to give the program a chance to get started, and it hasn't done that yet.
Director Menton.
Thank you. Heather, in all your years in working in a position like you are now, what has been your tactics when you had people asking and asking and asking to do something, and you had to give them a decision on what they would cut to get what they wanted? How have you dealt with that in the past?
That's a loaded question. There's a series of ways of doing it. We can offer alternatives to get there, and then ultimately we have to just make those reductions where we think it's best. But if we don't come on, we had a similar situation going forward this time. We asked, as somebody mentioned, what's that reduction from? We asked everybody to voluntarily make reductions to their expense budget. We got so much money doing that, and then I had to go back in and say, this is what we're going to do. Any project that hasn't started yet this year, we're going to defer to 2020 and those type of things. And so it's a combination of a decision-making process that we work through with SLT, and then we bring to the board and share with you about how we went ahead and did that. But these are relatively small amounts of money that we had to deal with this year, even though it's 20 or 30, $40 million. When we're talking about making up revenue If we don't do fare increases, that's going to be a significant change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I get a little bit worried, and I've been doing some analysis on my own, looking at 2012 versus 2018 in our numbers, looking at the CAFRs, putting the ridership numbers together, especially because of the next discussion we're going to have on the agenda. And what is that? And we can have that discussion in a minute or so. But more and more of the cost of doing business is being shifted to the taxpayer, and with the fare increases. And I just know that, you know, if we do go forward with a wish to not increase fares, that will be a substantial change at RTD. So I'd like to see, you know, I don't ask you to do it now, but in my own head, I would just love to see, go ahead, what is this list? What would you like to choose? Because I know we walk away from our board retreat going, want. And that's not how the world works. So that's my comment, and if you'd like to respond, go ahead.
Well, I'll just add another point to it that, you know, we are embarking on this T2 process, which we're hoping to get a lot of input from the public on, and hopefully that will help drive to where we put our resources, which will then give us a better idea of what those resources need to be and maybe some other options of how to generate those resources.
I'm going to respond back, having looked at a couple of the companies that did these T2 type projects around the country, and a lot of, I think the gist I got out of these large comprehensive plans was service cuts. And I saw today in an earlier meeting that some of the board members had for a open public meeting that some people think the T2 might lead to more bus service. I don't think so. I think it's going to lead to trimming. And that might be just the right plan. But there, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Folska. You'll have the last word on this update.
Thank you very much, Chairman Halleck. Heather, just, I will forget this, and it's probably not the right time to say it, but when you mentioned the T2 and other stakeholders' input, I think that our Citizen Advisory Committee needs to be a very meaningful piece of that, like a pillar. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And there's going to be some overlap with all these updates tonight, so we'll move on to the ridership update.
Okay, so on the ridership update, we have for the last couple months not included in the monthly financial report, in particular because of light rail numbers. We were concerned that we were seeing a pretty dramatic decrease from the previous couple years on light rail ridership. And so because we had changed our methodology for measuring ridership, going to automated passenger counts versus a process by which we extrapolated a lot of information from a lot of different databases. We wanted to make sure that that information was indeed accurate. So we have spent several months, I use we loosely, Susan and Doug and their service planning team have spent numerous months reviewing all the information, trying to validate that information against our automated passenger counts, also using the process that FTA approved for us to use to determine ridership based on APCs that we just got certified in. And also, as they'll briefly explain, validating that against other information that we have, such as park and ride counts, TVM sales at light rail stations, smart card taps at light rail stations, etc. So unfortunately, at this time, it appears that the information supports the fact that light rail ridership is down about 14% over this time last year. And so with that, I'm just going to turn that over briefly to Susan to discuss a little bit, and then I'm sure there are plenty of questions that we're going to have. So,
Susan Cohen. As Heather mentioned, when we started out looking at our first full district APC counts for February ridership, we noticed that light rail was down significantly, and other modes, bus, commuter rail, Flatiron Flyer, were not. And we were concerned at the time that we were having an issue with the APCs. We've spent the last 3 months with a group including service planning and the service development who are responsible for processing the data. And we looked, first of all, at different APC data. We also, we were required as part of the certification that Heather mentioned to do manual counts to compare to APC counts. In order to get certified, you have to be within 5%. Your APC count has to be within 5% of your manual count. And we've been passing that. We've been doing some of those as well this year. We've been passing those. We also looked at other data. We looked at the tap counts for smart card at different stations and on the buses. We looked at the sales at our ticket vending machines on light rail versus commuter rail versus Flatiron Flyer. We've also looked at park and ride usage, and we're seeing pretty much the same trends in all of them. Even with a fare increase, we're seeing a decrease in sales at ticket vending machines on light rail, while for the same time period, we're seeing increases on commuter rail. We were seeing increases even before the G line, and we're seeing increases on the Flatiron Flyer. We're also seeing increases on smart card taps on Flatiron Flyer, on commuter rail as well, and on just fixed route bus. We've also noticed decreases in park and ride usage on light rail. This one's a little different in that we have also seen some decreases in parking at just regular fixed route bus park and rides, but we are seeing increases in commuter rail and at the Flatiron Flyer park and rides. And in your packet, we had some trend graphs. We looked at ridership trends over time, and we noticed light rail is going down. If you notice in the picture, the graph, what page is that? The second graph, the first graph of the charts, do you see there's a trend of light rail going down while commuter rail is going up? There's a huge jump from April to May of 2019 for the G line, but you can see even before the G line, ridership was generally going up on commuter rail. Fixed route bus, over the past couple of years, we had seen decreases. Those have leveled off and are increasing slightly. We also are seeing increases on the Flatiron Flyer. The one service where we are seeing similar decreases is the mall shuttle, where we had some significant service changes. We have in packet some charts of comparisons by mode, of ridership by mode, station activity by mode, park and ride usage by mode, both in graphs and in numbers. And we are doing more analysis to see to look at reasons for changes, and Heather will speak to those.
So as you can imagine, we're trying to figure out why. And unfortunately, it's not just one answer, probably. There are some interesting things. The first thing we looked at was to see if there had been an enrollment change at Auraria campus, because they're a huge feeder of our light rail, and there has been no significant decrease in enrollment at Auraria. We also looked at trip length to see whether there was noticeable change, which can mean that certain types of trips were more adversely impacted than others, and that was not the case. We did look at the customer satisfaction survey that Jeff presented to you, I believe it was last month. And so there are a few things there that we wanted to point out. One is on-time performance on the train. We did see a decrease between the satisfaction level and the 2017 survey versus 2019. And also in light rail, the value received for the fare paid seems to be a bigger issue than on commuter rail or bus, meaning as the price elasticity is less on light rail than it is or it's greater than it is on commuter rail or bus. And so we also looked at, we have seen an impacts of reducing seating on light rail trains due to the ADA retrofit, and we have approximately 82% of that fleet completed with a new seat configuration, so that might add to it. One of the other things that we looked at was in the customer service survey. It looked at light rail riders tend to be more affluent. They tend to own vehicles where bus and even commuter rail riders not as much. And so they could be more impacted by those factors of value for money and on-time performance. So we are looking at all of those things combined. The interesting part is we have seen car ridership grow significantly over the years, but it is actually down, car sales down for the first 4 or 5 months of this year. So that doesn't align necessarily with that. And the other thing is gas prices have gone down significantly in the last few months, which typically means that people will drive more, but again, that's not a direct correlation. So we have not been able to find anything that's a direct correlation to these numbers, but we have information, anecdotal information that I just shared with you, that we are looking at to see if we can pinpoint how to make adjustments to change that trajectory of ridership on light rail. It is going to take time for us to further investigate it, and we will probably be having this discussion every month now in the monthly financial plan as we present those numbers to you in that document each month. So I'll be glad to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, it keeps growing. I just want to jump in before it gets too long. There was so much modeling, I can't see you, there was so much modeling done with the past program group. Do you guys ever go back and sort of validate or I guess, unvalidate those models based on this particular data?
So we have not done that yet, but that's one of the things we'll look at is the information that 49's used as a result. I'm assuming as you mean as a result of the fare increase and the impact on ridership. Yes, we will go back and look at that. We haven't looked at that exactly. I think what's interesting though when you look at it is that the most expensive fare that we have is on commuter rail, and those numbers are up significantly. The next most expensive change that was made was on local service, and bus is predominantly local service, and it's up slightly instead of going down. And so those are not consistent necessarily with the way we modeled it. We expected, since regional fare was not high as a percentage increase, that we wouldn't see the differences there, but we're going to go back and examine that. Yeah.
Okay, some other
So
externalities.
it's not consistent with what we expected.
Some other externalities other than just that
Yes.
price. Okay, thank you. Director Folska, you'll lead us off.
Thank you, Chair Mahalik. Heather, it seems to me one of the factors, the variables that hasn't been discussed tonight is climate change and weather. So when you talk about February, we had that bomb cyclone. Then in March, we had another bomb cyclone. Like, I've never heard of that before. Now, we're being barraged with hailstorms and thunderstorms in the afternoon. And so people might be thinking, hey, you know, I might just drive. But the trains, the commuter rails, and the Flatiron Flyer, they go from DIA, you know, they have really nice coverage, right? And then they go into Union Station, and it's a protected area. And certainly the Flatiron Flyer goes into Union Station underground. So it's a much more protected area. And I'm also curious, how do you count the boardings and alignments on the shuttle?
They have automatic passenger counters on all the vehicles as well.
So we went from like 25,000 a day to what?
Let me look it up real quick.
I'll jump in. We're about 42,000 a day on the mall.
Oh, okay.
Day average.
25 on the weekend, I'm sorry. Isn't it 20, 25 on the weekend?
So just as an example, we had, let's use June of 2018 was 928 boardings. I'm sorry, 928,000 boardings, and in May of this year, 865,000. So we have seen those go down a little bit.
So May might have been a nice month, and people say, hey, I'll walk, get my Fitbit steps in or something.
Yeah, February's down.
Huh?
February was down from last February, yeah. But it's
not the bomb cyclone, man. I wouldn't be on public transit. So, I mean, we had some severe weather events here, and I think it might be good to think about that too.
We'll take that into consideration. I'm not sure. We'll have to look at different ways that we can maybe try to measure that and see what that impact was, and we might be able to do that by specific times of day and weeks that those particular events happened.
Yeah, I mean, we have the almanac, right? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Folska. Director Lubow.
Thank you, Chair Mihalik. Would it be difficult to ask people to do a survey about what's happening on light rail?
So we just completed our customer service survey, which included light rail.
But things have changed.
Well, not since that survey was done in March, April. That's when we were seeing the decreases. So we have not talked about just doing a light rail specific survey. And remember, that survey was of our customers that were riding. So the issue could be what we're missing is the people that were riding that are no longer riding. Mm-hmm. And so that's difficult to get through a customer service, survey, in that we're surveying people that are still riding, which they're happy, and so therefore they're still riding. And so I don't know that we know how to get to that number. So,
but we are looking at ways to get more non-rider information.
That would be great. And I would think maybe just going to the colleges and just talking to the kids you might get some answers.
Well, on that point, let me just, we're meeting, had a meeting, keeps getting moved, but we have a meeting set up to have a conversation about what would it look like to do a survey of our EcoPass and College Pass holders, because those people get a free pass to any of our services. And why are those particular people not using the service if they have the ability to access free service? So that's one of the things that we're currently working with Jeff, that did the presentation to you, on how we might be able to do that, because we do have pretty good access to those people through the coordinators in each of those businesses and in the colleges. And so that's kind of a built-in group of people that, because if we can figure out why they're not riding and they have access to a free service, then maybe we can figure out why other people are not riding also.
Well, I think that's a good first step, but I think it would also be useful to try to reach other people. And I was also wondering, do we happen to know if at the same time that our light rail is going down, that there's been some increase in Uber and other of those transit management organizations?
So we have looked at TNCs, and in particular, we looked down in the downtown corridor, because there was a recent survey done by Downtown, was it Tourism or Downtown Denver Partnership, that showed that Uber usage downtown is significantly small. And so we're not actually seeing those numbers here compared to what we're seeing in other cities that are having huge, like 10, 20, 30% impacts, like San Francisco and Boston and some of those other areas from the TMCs. Ours seems to be much smaller, although it probably has had an impact on ridership as those services continue to grow. Mm-hmm. I think one thing, I'll just put a plug in, we just celebrated, our tickets being sold on the Uber app. We've exceeded 1,000 tickets sold, and they just got to 100% penetration last week, I believe it was. That is 1,000 people that opened the Uber app to take Uber who bought an RTD ride instead. And so we think that's a very positive thing, and that if we can continue those partnerships, not with other third-party providers, that will help. It's not going to solve this problem, but I just wanted to mention that is a place where we've actually have tangible information that somebody opened that app to take Uber and instead purchased a ticket to ride us. So
yeah, and that's great. I guess I'm just thinking also that there are people that know why they're not taking it. We just are having trouble figuring out how to ask them. But there are people who know why they're changing, and we need to ask them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Williams. I'll acknowledge you.
Thank you, Chair Mahalik. I'm kind of following along Director Lubow's path here, but I think there's some things we could do, like we could give incentives, you know, like green stamps. Like if you ride 10 times, you know, you get a pass to Water World. Or if you, I mean, seriously, if we're trying to get people to ride and people are just not riding, then, you know, why don't we incentivize them to ride? And a great example would be on the Uber app. If you buy your ticket on the Uber app, you got 10% off. I mean, there's you know, it's such old school incentivizing people that we maybe should look at that. I know there's cost involved and we're all being very cost conscious, but it's worth it to get 10 riders paying fare to give them 10% off, because that's 90% that we didn't have beforehand. So I'd just like to throw that out there, mentioning no names, Pauletta, and see if there are things.
Well, I actually can address that one. We have had that conversation, significant conversations around incentives. Our problem is we don't know necessarily the people that are riding, right? So I don't know that's the same person riding.
No, we don't. I don't want to give, you know, you're already riding, good for you. Yeah, I want to incentivize people who are not riding. Right. So we want to go to, you know, I don't know, to Park Meadows is probably a really great place to find a lot of people who are not riding, and have a little booth there and give them those cool little flashlights that you point, you know, that the train is on the other end of.
We'll look at that.
Say, you know, I mean.
Because we've talked about, like, not green stamps, because I don't know how many people know what S&H green stamps. You know, you're dating a lot of us.
That's okay.
In the room.
I did not say S&H green stamps. I just said green stamps.
Well,
it's a new app that you get when you turn 12.
So, but we have talked about incentivizing. We've talked it more about like a frequent rider program, like you get at Starbucks if you buy so much. And I think our problem now is we can't keep track of those people necessarily. But when we go to our new system, it's one of the things that we've discussed in our scope to determine to be in a scope of work or future phase of how can we then keep track of them so we can offer incentives. You've taken so many rides, you get one ride free. You've taken this, and you get...
Okay, so we have a base of people to do that. There's something called the Nonprofit Pass Program, where there are, how many of those did we do? $700,000 or something? That's a great place to do incentivizing, because you already have those participants, and then they now know that their kids and their husband and their brother, and they get perks. That's all. Sorry. Thanks. Bye.
I have it on my list.
Director Walker.
Thanks. I'm wondering if you've considered the age of the persons in the census tracts that surround or near the light rail stations. They tend to be in the south. Most of them are in the south part of the city, and that's the part that has the densest part of the population in the metro area. And a lot of baby boomers are hitting 65. I know in a lot of companies they're concerned about that silver tsunami. So I'm wondering if it's just a lot of retirees that live in the southern part of the district that are causing this. That's my guess.
Based on age groups or anything? We don't have that kind of data. Okay. We have not looked at that, and right now it looks like we wouldn't have that data other than comparing it against our customer survey information to see how that comes out. But we can discuss what that might look like.
Yeah. Okay. I know that retiring folks cause havoc on the economy because they don't spend money like they did when they were employed full time, and they don't need to ride anymore. So that's anyway. So that's all.
Although I heard this morning most of us are going to have to work to 75 before we retire, so we might be riding it more.
I don't plan to retire at all. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger.
The commuter rail graph on page 60 shows a steep spike in May. Is that the G line?
Yes, it is.
And the same graph in the next graph on the fixed route buses starts to show a drop. Is it look like the G line is cannibalizing bus service in that area?
We don't have data at that level to this point to be able to tell that. However, usually our ridership is seasonal, and as you get into end of May, June, July, August, you start seeing schools out of session.
So there's just a natural drop.
Yeah, if you look at the same graph and look at June, July, August, the previous year, you see it kind of dips at that point.
And are we looking at the commuter rail line separate from that too, to see how we're doing aside from adding the new line there?
Yes, in your packet, in the monthly financial status, we have it broken down by line for commuter rail, and Doug will talk to that.
Where is that?
It's in the monthly financial status.
Okay.
On
Last page.
And also we have this light rail drop broken out by line somewhere?
Yes.
Okay, I'll look for that again, thank you. And did I hear you say that the park and rides, or maybe I was just drawing this conclusion from the amount of people using it on the fixed rail, but do the park and ride users, is it fair to draw the conclusion that they tend to be more affluent, more car owners? Well, obviously they're more car owners. Have we ever looked at who uses our park and rides? I'll ask it differently.
I don't know. I'd have to check on that to see if our parking group has looked at, if they have any information regarding that. So I can't really answer that right now, but we'll look into it for you.
It looks like the fixed service has a lot less park and ride use, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Director Rivera-Malpiede.
Thank you, Chairman Hollick. Just a couple of things. The first one is this really makes me think about first last mile connections. And when I'm on the 16th Street Mall, I am seeing exponentially so many more scooters. And I'm wondering if that might have an impact. You might say, well, it's downtown, but I'm seeing them in Northwest Denver, in South Denver, and I wonder what that is doing in terms of folks utilizing that for shorter distances and not getting on a bus.
We'd actually considered that same, and that's why we specifically looked at that average trip length to look to see if we were losing short trips to scooters. We may be losing some short trips to scooters, but our average trip length is pretty much the same, so we're losing them all over the board.
Yeah, okay. The second thing is I'm wondering at Auraria how many students maybe are opting out of the EcoPass program, or is it just a mandate that it's part of their registration fee? It is?
Yes, it is a mandate. They can't opt out.
And then I guess my last thing is talking about going and talking to folks who are not using all of our services is maybe perhaps we need to think outside of the box a little bit and use a web panel, which really does some concentrated effort in getting people to be very candid, and it's an easier way to collect data rather than doing like focus groups and those stuff. And there are businesses and organizations that are experts in that area, so I would just like to suggest that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Folska, before I get to you, I'm going to jump to the two that have not spoken yet, I don't think. Director Lewis?
I just have a quick question. So you talked about the seating reductions for the ADA compliance, and I wondered, I'm trying to think of how to ask this question, but with the L line, it was reduced, I think, from maybe 3 cars to 1 car, or maybe 2 cars to 1 car. I can't recall. There's 1 car. I do know that for sure, yeah. And I'm curious if this may have an impact as folks are seeing like their trains are more full because you have less seating and people are choosing to not ride because they're having to stand up or having to take an alternative route. Have you all looked into that?
Dave, do you want to try to answer that one?
All right, thanks.
Good evening. It's Dave Jensen, AGM of Rail Operations. I'll take a shot at that one. So far, that's something that we would look at to see how many standees we have per car. So we've got a certain board authorized number, and we haven't seen anything to exceed that number. There's nothing to indicate to us that on the L line in particular, that ridership warrants additional equipment.
Yeah, I asked about the L line specifically because I've gotten a lot of constituent phone calls about the L line. So that's the reason I asked, but maybe it just makes sense for us to ride together.
Well, if there's specific trains at specific times, we would absolutely look at those to see if ridership has, that's what we'd like to find out.
Yeah.
the ridership has climbed on that. But right now, the numbers that we're seeing don't indicate that.
Thank you so much. And then Heather, for you, I'm just thinking about demographics in which we can focus on. And one of the opportunities I think that we miss is the focus on the youth. While we may not be able to like reap those rewards today, and if we teach that behavior, maybe that's something that we can do. Of course, I have to speak in that lens because I work in education, and people would probably kill me if I didn't. And then our immigrant and refugee populations, we talked about the, what is it called? The trainer, the
Travel training.
travel training, yeah. And if there's opportunities, yes, if there's opportunities to partner with immigrant and refugee communities and support them in teaching that behavior as well. And that's based on an assumption that that's a demographic we need to tap into.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Cook?
Just in response to Director Geisinger's questions, one thing to remember is that the service changes associated with the G-Line startup have been delayed until the August service changes. So we have 2 and maybe 3 duplicative routes, the 55L, the 72L. They lost all their ridership, but they all went to the train. And the reason that we have those and see a decline, I think, is because of that effect, at least in part. The overall effect, I think, has been a great increase based upon the ridership on the G line in comparison to what those bus lines were carrying. We're seeing a lot of new riders. The one I do think we have to worry about is the B line. I think I was going to ask you about whether we can just pay close attention to that, because I think some of the Arvada people were zipping over and using the B line. So I thought some of the decline we saw in the B line might be a result of people going closer to home. So anyway.
Okay, thank you. Director Folska, you are next.
Thank you, Chair Mahalik. Heather, it seems to me that sort of taking off from what I think is a very insightful point from Director Walker regarding the senior tsunami. I mean, we have a lot of senior affordable housing along our light rail stations, and they're not commuting to work, right? Most of them are retired, and there's really, like, they go to the theater, they go here or there, but they're not commuting every day. And so, and if the affordable housing along the light rail is for senior citizens and not our teachers and policemen and firemen who do commute to work, then I think we're going to continue to see a decline on the light rail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Minton.
Thank you. Could you please remind me when we'll be getting the performance family report?
We need to check on it. It's supposed to come out later this month, but I don't have an exact time for you.
Okay. And speaking for the constituents, many in my area, they would rather not see another cost shifted to them to lower the cost for others, because it makes them choose to steer away from perhaps public transit. So giveaways, further subsidies, which I've seen grow from looking at 2012 to 2018. Those are the figures I was talking to you about earlier. They continue to grow dramatically. And I can speak for constituents where Golden sent us a letter. They're upset about their fares, long-going story, but people don't want to continue to give up more for somebody else if it's going to if it's all about behavior change. It should be about choices. And taking somebody's money to give it to somebody else limits their choice. So I'm not speaking to you directly. I'm just trying to just balance the scales here a little bit. That's all I was trying to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Catlin.
Thank you. To Director Cook's point, anecdotally, I've had some of my constituents tell me that they have shifted from using the W line to the Gold line because it's not that much of a leap to go to the end of line station in Wheat Ridge once you're, like in the mountain communities, when you're coming from I-70, you can stay on I-70 rather than go to 6th Avenue or the Taj Mahal. So there has been a shift from some of the light rail, and you don't break this down by line particularly, or I don't know if you have that information, but I think there has been a shift from light rail to commuter rail.
Yeah, we'll have,
It's packet page 84. Not that we
package
wanna
page
get there now,
84.
but we'll get there during the financial.
Doug's going to talk about that. Because we have it by line, and we continue to, we'll provide that for you every month by line. Yeah.
Those, if I could interrupt, those might be an interesting group to survey. Is it just a matter of, getting it, or is there something about the ride? Is it the level boarding? Is it smooth, or what? Something like that? That might be an interesting piece of the ridership to survey.
Yes,
It's
Director
the
Gatlin.
time.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, I'm sure there'll be lots more questions, maybe more questions than answers over the next however many months, but I do want to think that, I wonder if we wait until the next fair change discussion before we address this, or if we have the ability to do something in advance of that if we keep seeing certain trends. So that's just my commentary. We will go on to the next update. This is the May financial status report.
Yes, and I'm going to have Doug speak to this. We did pass this out, and again, apologize that the packet that is in yours did not include the sales tax information, but we just received it last night due to the holidays, so we didn't have it for presentation in your packet, and so we wanted to make sure you did get it. So we have provided the handout, and we will have it electronically available also for the packet update. That is probably going to occur for a while now, especially when we have holidays, in that the state has adjusted their reporting because they get sales tax information from 2 different sources. And so, especially with the holiday, it delayed the reporting to us until yesterday. So luckily, we got it in time for today's meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug, and he can walk through it.
Thank you, and good evening. This is Doug McLeod. So on the first page, we'll go through sales and use taxes. So it's pretty much continuing the same trend that we've seen for the 2019 budget, approved budget. The forecast that was used for sales and use taxes was a 5.6% increase over prior year. What you'll see with our next financial statement update after the budget's approved this month is the amended budget, which includes the reforecasted sales and use taxes that we got in March. Those will be at a 4.4% increase. So based on the results that we've been seeing for the first several months, as Lead School Business did their new forecast in March, they saw a trend a little bit lower than what they were expecting back in September, so they revised their forecast down from a 5.6% increase to 4.4%. So what we're looking at here is it still has the 5.6% increase in the budget. So you can see year to date we're down 1.6%, we're below budget by 1.6%, which is a shortfall of about $4 million. We are up year over year 3.3%, so still good that we have an increase, just not quite where we want it to be. Moving on to ridership, so we've talked a lot about this in the previous discussion, but I would refer you to, it's actually the second to the last page, where we break it down between mode and also by line. So here, this will give you a better sense of what the changes have been versus the prior year. So you can at least see the activity by month. And it's hard to look at a trend month to month because there's different numbers of days. There's seasonality, as was discussed previously with schools being out. But what you can see in the far right column is a percentage change year over year by line. So as you can see up at the top, the total of bus service, including the Flatiron Flyer, but excluding the non-revenue service, such as mall shuttle, which is down at the bottom, bus service is actually up 1.3% year to date, year over year. And then you can see all of the light rail lines broken down, and there's some significant decreases by year. Some of them are upwards of 23% below where we were last year, for a total in light rail of a 13.7% decrease through 5 months, year over year. And then moving down, you can see the breakout of commuter rail, and you can see that G line came in April, So these are in thousands too. So G line, there's a line for that, 17,000 riders in April, 170,000 in May. So that's contributing to some of that 13.5% increase over on the far right year over year for commuter rail. And then you can see our total revenue service. This is that negative 1.8% decrease that you saw in the board memo for the ridership discussion for light rail. The main driver of that, of course, is the 13.7% decrease in light rail. And then moving down, you can see our non-revenue service, small shuttle, access ride, van pull, et cetera, for a total decrease in ridership of negative 2.6%. But anyway, that'll give you a better sense. And there was a question too about if there's a shift between light rail riders using commuter rail. We'll have to do a little bit more research on that. It's really difficult to tell here because we have the introduction of the G line coming in, and we have some swings month to month. So we'll take a look at that and get back to you. The final item of the three key factors that we look at is fare revenue. So referring back to the front page, you can see how our fare revenue is performing. We are 0.9% under for the month and 3.7% under budget year to date. So that equates to $2.3 million shortfall in revenue. I would point out that we didn't know when the G line would open, so we did anticipate that opening earlier in the year. So some of that budget shortfall is due to the G line opening later than we had anticipated in the approved budget. But what you can see over on the far right, we're in the green year over year, so 9.8% increase May this year versus May last year in fare revenue, and a 4.8% increase year to date. The big difference between the 9.8% and the 4.8% is because we've got the G line and Siri that came into effect in April and May. So that sums it up for my remarks, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Director Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Doug. Do we look at how online buying affects our sales and use tax? And if we are looking, are we involved in lobbying toward that kind of stuff? I mean, I don't know about the rest of the room, but I buy everything on Amazon. Me, personally. So I'm just wondering if we have any involvement in that. There's a lot of talking going on. I'll just keep talking until you guys are ready. I'll just can fill it in. I can sing. You want to hear a solo?
We're debating which one line it was. Yes. So it's had a positive impact on our sales and use tax. We were just saying that this time over last year, we have seen a 52% increase in sales tax attributable to online stores. And that's really as a result of the change in that the online retailers now need to remit and or advise you that you must remit a use tax. So, so that we've seen that number go up quite a bit.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Director Broom.
Thank you, Chair. Was there a change in methodology when you were compiling the ridership on light rail?
No, there was not year over year. So, and that's a good question because one of the things we considered is we began our APC gathering of data back at the beginning of 2018, and we're comparing 2019 results versus 2018. So one of the concerns we had was we were checking the most recent activity at light rail stations, smart card taps, et cetera, to try to see if our most recent taps were correct, or our most recent ridership was correct. Then we realized, well, what if 2018 was too high and it was being measured incorrectly? We went back and we verified the same data, and we verified that
So
was
we're comparing
correct.
apples to apples?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Director Walker.
Thanks. I don't remember when, it might have been in the May service change of last year, but there was kind of a switch between the C and the D line where we increased service, later night service on the C and decreased it, or reduced late night service on the D. Do you remember when that was? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm wondering if this has any effect, if that action had any effect on these numbers, because the C and D are down a lot.
We'll have to check on that. Right now, they're both down significantly, 20%, but we'll check on when that transition was made. I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't either. I want to say it was around last.
But we'll check on that
spring.
for you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lubow.
Thank you, Chair Mahalik. It was mentioned before that we've been having some issues with the mall shuttle because we look like we're having reduction in ridership in there. Could you talk about that?
So actually, the decrease in the mall ridership last fall coincides with a reduction in service on the mall shuttle last year. And then we have seen that steadily increasing since that reduction took place. So we saw a sharp decrease in ridership, and now we've seen that trending back up again to where it was prior to that change in service.
And if I may, that was just during the lunchtime. So we didn't, we scaled back the headways a little bit during the lunchtime peak based on the ridership we were seeing during lunchtime peak and the capacity we had. And so the numbers continue to rise, so we're watching that closely.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And it was nice to hear that we have a 52% increase in internet sales use tax. Is that beyond what was expected? And I'm just wondering, I mean, is that a silver load that we can all ride off into the sunset now with all that money?
I wish. I mean, there have been a variety of studies done on online sales in Colorado and what that number would look like. I mean, it's significant statewide. We have continued to see it rise. I don't think it's near where it should be if everyone was paying sales tax on their online sales. So I would think that we would continue to see that number rise. I don't think it's something we can ride off into the sunset and say that's going to save us, but it might offset changes that we're continuing to see in brick and mortar stores. So if you look at our brick and mortar stores, those numbers are down. And so we continue to, what we were seeing is brick and mortar go down, and we weren't getting any sales and use tax from online. So at least now we're starting to see some sales and use tax from online that's offsetting some of that brick and mortar decrease.
Well, that being so, did you want to talk to that?
Oh, sorry, I was just going to give you an idea of the scale. So even though it's increased 52%, it went from 780,000 in May of last year to 1.2 million in May of this year. So it's still about 2% of our monthly collection. So it's relatively small, but it has grown significantly.
Okay, but I imagine if we really collect what people are really buying, it's going to be a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think you'll start seeing that as audits start coming in, that the state does and local entities do as it relates to home rule cities, and more people are found to not be paying that, then the more audits you see and the more findings you'll see, more people start to remit it. So it's just going to take a while to ramp up.
Now, is that included in the leads of prognosis?
Yes.
So
they look at online sales, yes.
They've already looked at that?
Yes.
Okay. No silver bullet?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, I keep looking. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Director Lubow. Something you said triggered a thought. How has marijuana sales been? Is that flat, up, good?
He's got the numbers here, but I remember them being very good.
Yeah, and I apologize, I don't have medical marijuana. It's usually about, medical marijuana stays pretty steady. It's about $200,000 a month, but in the month of May, it was, the retail marijuana was $716,000.
Last year was like $500,000, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were estimating losing about $500,000 if it didn't get restored, and now we're up in that 700,000 range going up, so.
And then car sales are way down, right?
Car sales have been down. I don't know about this last month, but they have overall been down. It looks like they were up slightly. 1%. 1%.
Oh, okay.
But yes, they have been down. We had seen a steady trajectory of car sales going up and up, far exceeding inflation or any other growth rates in the 6+% range. The beginning of this year, we saw that drop slightly, and now it appears to be trending up slightly again. But yeah, and I don't know the reason for that because that has been a pretty, steady trajectory up.
Okay, thank you. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Chair.
It's quick.
So I actually had a very similar thought to Director Walker with the C, D, the L, and you could probably throw the H in there if there were any changes, substantial changes that would have impacted these percentage changes, if you might be able to investigate that. And I also was curious, so 2 questions, if there, when we have service changes of any kind, do we ever survey folks to see how those changes impact them in their day-to-day commutes?
I can answer the first question.
Okay.
So we did look at it. So we've been looking at the way we present it to the board and also to the FTA on a period of close, so monthly and weekday averages. What we also did is we went back and we looked at run boards versus run boards, because there are some changes when you look at, say, the May run board this year versus May run board last year, but there was nothing significant that would have that we saw that would have caused this type of a change.
On any of these
lines?
At
least the ridership, correct, yes,
okay.
On those lines that you mentioned in particular. As far as the other question goes, I think Dave.
Yep. On the second question, we are initiating this year to do some survey information after run board changes, so we can get feedback before a service change and then feedback after as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And then my final, it's more of a comment than it is a question, so don't feel like you have to answer it. I'm curious if there could have been some changes that push folks off the light rail into our fixed transit, or like fixed routes. Is that possible?
Well, it's always possible. I think probably what we're seeing more of is what was talked about a little bit earlier, that with the opening of the G line, that people are probably moving off the West line or some other line and going to one of those stations. Or like we saw with even the B line, which is commuter rail, we have seen a decrease in the B line in those couple of months that the G line has been open. So maybe shifting people that way, but I don't think we have enough data to be able to tell whether they've shifted from light rail to fixed bus service at this time.
Is there a way in which you could look at the declines in ridership on light rail and see if there's a bus in near proximity to see if there's an increase in ridership on that route?
We could. I don't know if we did that or not, so let me check.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Volska, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman Hollick. Doug, what is the combined marijuana sales tax between medical and recreational?
In percentage terms? Or
Just a month, like you said, 200,000 for
yes,
medical?
Sorry, 200,000 for medical and about 700,000 for retail, so 900,000.
Okay, and that's consistently increasing?
Yes.
So maybe they're not riding the train. But that's really Director Broom's thought. I just thought it made sense.
I think they're riding the mall shuttle. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little punchy, but...
Yeah, but actually, you know, when you think about it, when you think about like the commuter rail versus light rail, now people have a choice. And the commuter rail is big, it's bold, it's sparkly, it moves fast, it's groovy, you know, it's going somewhere, right? Our light rail is like a broken down old horse, you know? I mean, it's breaking down. No, don't take it personally, you know? I love the light rail. But I'm like getting these email notices at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning about problems with all of these light rail lines. And they take forever. I'm glad that we opened the Southeast Rail Extension. But if you were going to try to get from one end to the other, you might as well drive a car, even in the traffic. I think that maybe those are some questions to look into, because it takes before we opened it, it was a 45-minute ride from Lincoln to down here. Now, if you are busy doing other things and you know, don't mind, but for a lot of folks, that's just too long.
We're both Lincoln to downtown riders on that line. So
yeah, no, I mean, but you have work to do, Heather.
Yes,
lots of it. So you can occupy yourself. But I mean, for a lot of people, I think that's the thing when they think, oh, I could drive somewhere and get on the A line or the B line or the G line. You know, that's moving, and you get the sense, you know, you're really moving. You're not just stopping every 5 minutes. And then that's really the issue with the R line, because it's just meandering around. And slow.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be looking at those things.
What if we had a chat with Henry and got a nice double-decker express rail from the Southeast to Denver?
Yeah, well, you can't see Henry, but he's...
I know. I can feel it, though.
Okay, thank you, Director Folska. Director Lubow?
Just quickly, I have an informational question. I think they're called use taxes, I'm not sure, but does RTD collect if somebody in the district goes out of the district and buys a car and that pays a sales tax? Do we get that too?
Yes, that is called a use tax.
And we do get it?
If they registered in the district.
Okay.
So use
At their
taxes are
address.
much more difficult to collect, and so that's why you see that number. Well, you might not see the number, but we see the number. It varies greatly from month to month how much use tax we collect, and that's really on the citizen to pay their use tax when they have done something such as that. Now, in car sales, they track that. They keep track of if you bought something in Grand Junction, you have to report where you live and you get charged the sales tax on where you live. But on other items such as boats and RVs and things like that, it's much more difficult.
But theoretically, we do collect it.
Yes, we do collect it. It's just probably more of a reporting issue than a collecting issue.
All right, thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we are moving on to our next update, past program update. A lot of overlap in these.
Yes. If this has overlap, but I did want to give you an update on where we are. The update is in your packet, but we do have some breaking news. Breaking news. We have determined a go-live date. We do have one more hurdle to get through tomorrow, but we're fairly confident that will be positive. And so we are aiming for Monday, July 29th. To go live. So in the next couple days, we'll be quite busy. We're going to be sending you additional information that we had promised you before on FAQs and information related to the program. We will then be working and informing our nonprofit programs right after you receive that information. And then we will be doing a press release after that. And then all of the documents that you have received and the nonprofits have received will be posted on our live page. We have a live page that will be live, is what I meant to say. God, I even had it written down. So that will be starting to be populated tomorrow with those documents. And we continue to have meetings because there has been concern from the nonprofit programs about how this affects them. There's misinformation. There's information that we need to validate with them. And so we're continuing to set up meetings with them, and we'll make sure they continue to get information as we go through the process of going live in the next couple weeks. So we expect to have more meetings with them. But that's where we are as of tonight. So we will be moving forward on that, and then we will continue to report to you progress. So we expect the first few weeks or so to be kind of slow because it'll take a while for people to apply and start getting their cards, and then start selling the fare media, so that's available to them. But we will continue to do monthly updates on this program so that you know the status and any ongoing issues and concerns that we have. We do have the capability in working with OAT to do updates and future phases of this program. And so immediately we'll be dealing with defects that might come up as people use it. We'll have a mechanism for people to provide us feedback on the live page where they can provide us feedback, because we're hoping to gather that, and then that will influence changes that we will make to the system, whether they be immediate changes or changes that we'll roll out in future phases. So we will be providing that opportunity also, so that they have a kind of a direct line to us to provide that feedback, and then we'll be accumulating it and figuring out where we have potential issues moving forward. So it's going to be an ongoing review and update of the program to see how it's going. Again, this is a major undertaking. We've never done anything of this magnitude before, at least in recent history. And so it'll be one of those issues we continue to work through and report back to the board on.
See a couple speakers. Director Rivera-Malpiede.
Thank you, Chair Mahalik. Heather, I want to really commend you and your team on the willingness to look outside of the box, because this is probably one of the most important pieces I've seen come through this agency in a very, very, very long time. And because it's so complex with the constituents that are going to be utilizing this and what it was developed for, I just don't want to lose the spirit of it. And I'm really happy to hear you saying that there's going to be a feedback page, and then also that you're willing to look and adjust things. I will just say to you again for the record that very concerned about my community, the Latino community, especially in light of the immigration sweeps that's being set that may happen in Denver. They're very leery of doing anything. And I would say that not only for the Latino community, but refugee communities and people who are here struggling to try and make it here. That's one thing I just want to say for the record. But the other is I appreciate what you are saying about working in collaboration with the nonprofits and their constituency bases. Because it's an app base, a lot of those folks don't have smartphones, or they are not app savvy, or that platform may be a real detriment to them. So I just want to say I do have a lot of serious concerns, but I also have a lot of optimism in the sense that everybody's willing to sit at the table and work. But I think communication and transparency is probably the two most important things that I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lewis, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I second everything you have said there. One of the things that come to me quite often, Heather, and you mentioned this, was the nonprofit programs, particularly the service providers and those that work with our unhoused folks, and the proof of eligibility, and then also needing to keep up with the pass as well while also experiencing homelessness. And so my guess is, because it's come to me quite a bit, that it's probably going to come to you all, and to plan for that, to mitigate for that, prepare for that, because I think while it expands to a lot, this expands further to a lot more folks in terms of reach individuals. I think our unhoused folks may experience more barriers to access.
Yeah, and I definitely think we're hearing those things from a variety of sources. I think one thing that we have had from day one, so we've been aware that this is probably going to be a concern, is working with CDHPE and Colorado Human Services, as well as Denver Human Services, very closely, because they deal with this population on a very regular basis. And so we just had a conversation the other day about some of the things that they experience on a regular basis. We've been able to work with them on some of the homeless issues and how they get their benefits to the homeless population and how we can accommodate that also. So I think, like I said, it's a new thing for us. It's going to be clunky, is the word we've been using probably at first, until we are able to work through some of the issues. And I'm sure as we work through one issue, we're going to come up with more things that we weren't anticipating working through the program. But the team is not disbanding when we go live. To their chagrin, we have weekly meetings set up all the way through the rest of the year, so that we can continue to make the program evolve, and then see where we have issues and deal with them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Director Williams.
We just need to publicize that we do not have a citizenship question on our application.
That is correct, and it does not require a social security number or a TIN number.
So we need to put that like on the front page of the paper.
Yeah, and I
That
still
would
understand the concerns that people have by putting their information into a database, but we purposely did not require that information.
And we in my other job, we're going to talk to DHS about putting a page in the Getting There Guide in 5 languages that references how you go about being qualified for that. So I've been talking to people already about getting that information out into those communities. So thank you for all of the work that you've done on this. And you know, like I said earlier tonight, let's just hang in there and get it out on the street and get it up and running, and then we'll carry on.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to our last update for this committee. And this is the draft report on finishing fast tracks and the Northwest Peak Service Plan. Yes, General Manager.
So, Mr. Chair, we'll just be brief in our remarks this evening and be happy to take questions and input. So, at the last board meeting, we presented the draft preliminary report. We went through a brief presentation with the board of directors. We had a lot of good questions. We were able to answer some of those questions that night. We've received a number of questions also from board members. So tonight, in the packet that you have for the committee tonight, that came out earlier in the week, is again the presentation that we did at the board meeting. The draft preliminary report that we had put together is also in the packet. Plus, we have the questions and answers of all the questions that we received, and most of them we were able to answer. We still have some that we need a little bit more time and a little bit of analysis to work through. So it's a lot of information. I know that you've had a good amount of time to look at the report in the last few weeks, and we were really appreciative of the questions we received. They were good, they were thoughtful, and we're happy to take any questions. So Heather's here, Bill's here, and also Henry's here, and myself.
Okay, thank you. Director Folska, you're first.
Thank you, Chairman Hollick. General Manager Genova and your SLT team, thank you so much for the courage of your bold and big ideas. This, to me, is the best thing I've seen come out of this agency. In spite of what Director Malpiedi said, the Fair Pass program is good. This is off the charts. And I do think it takes a lot of courage, and it's going to take some time to digest it. Again, I would encourage you to include the CAC in your process of moving forward on this in a very meaningful way. But thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lubow.
Thank you, Chairman Hollick. I, too, want to thank staff for all the work that you've put into this. You know, you're very busy people, and having this added in addition asked a lot. And I asked a lot of questions, and you answered them, so I really appreciate that from all of you. I wanted to give some comments, because I mean, it's huge, and a whole bunch of us went and spoke with Adams County commissioners, and I was saying, one of the things I was saying was that, you know, the agency is at a turning point now. We're kind of winding down construction of the easier corridors to fund. And we're winding down, and that's freeing up time and effort to go after the harder, not the low-hanging fruit, the high-hanging fruit. And we haven't had that freedom before. So it's an exciting time. I personally believe that funding over $2 billion worth of projects is, you know, we're going to need additional money. And most probably that means going back to the voters, at least for some of that. In my opinion, and I don't have a crystal ball, but in my opinion, it's going to be hard for RTD with the history that we've had. On our own, going out and getting that money and having it pass. That's just my opinion. But so, therefore, I would think that we'd have a better path being part of a regional initiative. And I know they're out there. People are discussing things now. And I would urge staff, and I'm sure you're already doing it, being part of those discussions. And this time not being shunned, but really addressing finishing fast tracks, because it's the elephant in the room that, in my opinion, has been stalking the transportation initiatives. If you don't deal with it, it takes them down because people are angry. So I think it needs to be dealt with. And I think if we can be creative and show that we're really trying and that to improve things, and that we have a good plan, I think we could and should be included in a regional initiative. So I think one of the things that we have to do, in my opinion, I'm just stating my opinion, is we have to put some skin in the game and not just say we don't have any money. I personally think that's not a good ask to say we don't have anything. And so that means looking at our own budget, which is very tight, and I know that, but really looking at it to see where are there wants as opposed to needs that we could get some money out of our own budget to say that this is what we could afford to pay down the cost, so that then we can go to the stakeholders and the citizens and ask them for money. You know, we're not just asking them with a handout, we're saying we're also coming forward with our own, and it's painful, but we're going to do it. I personally think that finishing the corridors in the time that I've been on the board has not been a priority. You know, it's just been seen as almost this thing that we can't do. And I would urge that we have an attitude of I can rather than I can't. And at least try to have that attitude. And I think what that means is looking for money in our budget, and also talking to the stakeholders for support for the creative funding ideas that Heather listed in the report. There's lots of them. We can't do it on our own, but we can do it with the stakeholders. And I also think that we need to think outside the box about getting our corridor projects, if possible, on the DRCOG project list. I'm not sure if we can do that. I don't know enough about that, but I think it would be worth trying, so that we could see if we could incrementally finance things. Okay. And this is a hard one. I think that we need to give this a major shot and do everything that we can to try to raise money in creative ways. And if we are hitting up against a wall that we just can't beat it, we have to start thinking really about going to our citizens and saying, well, what else can we do to make you whole? If the rail is not going to happen, what can we do? And you know, if I would say that that's really something, because I've been working on this for years. So that's the big picture from my take for now. But one additional point I wanted to talk about was the ridership figures for the Northwest Rail, which are very low, unfortunately. And they were reduced, of course, after the NAM study because of the Great Recession. And the Great Recession brought down development. But it's been 10 years since the Great Recession. I mean, we're in the Great Boom, really. And I'm just wondering how we get those more realistic figures in based on the reality that we're not in the Great Recession. And I think that could really change things in terms of ridership. And one additional thing, it's my understanding that for the 119 bus ridership, they include Larimer and Weld potential riders. And if that is true, I think we should also think about doing that for the Northwest Rail. Okay, at least for now, that's it for me. Thank you for listening to all that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Chairman Tisdale, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. I do want to applaud staff again, as I did last time when this was presented, for pulling together an exceptional report. All of the update reports this evening have been exceptional and extremely useful. This one in particular, I appreciate very much, addressing the questions that were submitted to you all immediately following the initial timely presentation of this draft interim report. And I note on packet page 259, question 27, I very much appreciate your including question 27 and giving us the opportunity to consider alternatives to sales tax, because we did, after all, dictate in that April 16 resolution that staff be creative in reviewing financing opportunities and possibilities. And I think, as discussed here in question 27 and the response, you have done that. So again, congratulations, thank you, and we know this continuing process will repeat itself and will come back to us for further discussion, further exploration. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. You are next.
Thank you, Chair. I agree. This is great work. I spent a lot of time with it again in the last couple of days and really appreciate it. And I also appreciate Director Lubow's comments. I agree with much of that. Thank you for taking the time to answer so many of our questions from before. I am looking at the chart that shows the projections of the NAM study. It's page 11 of the report. And at that point, the weekday ridership in the horizon year 2035 was projected to be 9,300 to 10,800. I think now in 2040, it's down to, this is for full development of the corridor, 4,100 to 5,400, which is basically half. And I guess I'd just be interested to see, I think you said, Bill, that it's based on Dr. Cogg's employment projections, is that right?
This is Bill Van Meter, Assistant General Manager of Planning. That is correct.
Is it possible to get the data and just look at it? You know, when I look at it and see 800 projected as, you know, for a peak period rail and that these numbers are in half, I'd just like to see what we're looking at.
Yeah, we can provide that information, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. But yeah, I think it's great. I think that we need to start looking at all of these options and keep working with our partners to try to move it forward constructively. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Buzek. You are next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for this report. A lot of information in here, and importantly, the estimated costs to complete these corridors. Thank you, Kate. Is interesting. So we've got all these different scenarios and different options moving forward, and we don't know what's going to happen, you know, down the road, because we're clearly not going to get very far with just our sales tax revenue and fare box revenue. So something else has to happen. But as I explored these different scenarios, one thing I have to say that the more attractive types of scenarios involved sequencing that built out the less expensive corridors in a quicker fashion. The problem with that is those corridors are south of I-70, and again we have the issue of regional equity. And because we created a goal in our 2020 General Manager task goals to consider regional equity, I continue to hope that we look forward, we look at that moving forward beyond 2020 as well, so that if we somehow come up with money to work on fast tracks corridors, we need to look at the corridors that may be more expensive, may be more costly to work on, but because of this equity issue are the ones that we really need to focus on. So I know that's probably way down the road, but I just wanted to get those comments out there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you. Director Walker.
Thanks. Scenarios 3B and 3D are pretty aggressive, and I'm wondering what type of a workforce would be needed to complete those lines in that amount of time, and do you think Denver, this region, will have that type of workforce available, especially since there's one community in the district decided to not grow at all anymore, and if others follow, what happens? Where do the tens of thousands of people that I think it would take to, or at least 10,000 people that would take to complete this, where would they live? Because they wouldn't all be already in Denver. Not with what we have going on already.
I'll take a run at it. So this is Dave Genova. It's a great question. I thought about that same question as well as I was reading through the draft report the first time, and you know, essentially that's really, and I'll go out here and see, I think the team's going to concur with this, but we really didn't look at that part of the equation as far as the labor market for, well, not just construction, but also for the operations and maintenance, right? Because I think that we can look at, our history of, the build out that we've done over, since, let's say 2013 and even earlier than 2013 before we started doing fast tracks, we've been in a pretty aggressive growth in terms of opening new corridors. I mean, we've done, I think, 10 corridor projects in 25 years. So, that's one every couple of years. And so, I think we're definitely feeling the effects of pretty rapid expansion in terms of having enough available labor pool to do our operations and maintenance. So, for now, the report as I see it doesn't look at that piece. But I think as we move ahead, it's something we would have to really look at in terms of when we started to have conversations about maybe sequencing or, which project is first and is it commuter or is it light rail? I mean, those are things we'll have to consider, I think, as we have those detailed conversations in later years. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would just second that. I mean, we did have conversations around, and not even to Henry's, where he'd like to see him, is trying to get those corridors, as Director Busick mentioned. How could we get as many done as possible? And we weren't looking at geographic equity in that place, but that's why we did run several scenarios, one doing north corridors first and one doing the least expensive ones. But that human resource issue is a big issue that we did not take into consideration, because that would have further complicated how we could actually do that process, just to be honest about it. We also did not really look at sequencing the projects from a true construction scheduling process. Henry can attest to that. We tried to get them done as quickly as possible, and we spread them out 1 year or maybe 2 years. But practically what we've learned over the years in doing the Fast Tracks program is we need to really look at how we're doing that, not only from an internal labor, can we hire the operators and stuff, but also our community, and do we have the construction capability in the community to do that also. So no, we did not, for this exercise, did not get there.
And that's fine. It was just a thought I had. And also the jurisdictions that would be along with you in the permitting, the stormwater permit, the swamps, and all the other civil permits that are needed out there. They need to have the staff to help review these things also, the state or whoever else steps in. Just a thought. Great effort, though. No doubt about that. This is fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Folska.
Thank you. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what Director Busick mentioned about equity. And I think Chair Tisdale could confirm this. And my numbers might be a little off because I think they're old, but the Southeast Economic Development Organization, at least when Mike Fitzgerald was there, I think I heard numbers that 70% of the workforce in South Denver metro region, Lone Tree, come from north of I-70. So I'm always kind of curious, does that ring true, roughly? You got to talk to me.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it rings high, actually, at 70% north of I-70 working in South Metro. That doesn't comport with my understanding. It's high.
My number's too high?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's the number that I had heard. I mean, I remembered it because of the 70 and the 70, but nonetheless, there's a lot of people coming down, or it's going to be coming down there, and that seems to be some numbers that maybe you need to go into, Mr. Van Meter, your numbers and projecting the ridership. But you go up there, even on the weekend, it is bumper to bumper, and even the express lane on I-25 up to, what is it, 120th or something, is packed. I mean, it's not even express. So it's quite clear that, expanding the highway isn't going to solve the problem either. So I'm wondering about those numbers, Bill, those projected numbers. And can you maybe look up what the original Fast Tracks projected numbers were for the W line and what they actually came out to be?
We can provide that ridership information, you bet.
Yeah, just from the projection. I mean, we did that. And then, when it comes to human capital, I think Director Walker's quite right. I mean, where are we going to get these people? But I do recall some people being worried in Will County that they wouldn't have jobs. They could come work here. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Director Folska. Director Cook, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I did want to say I agree with Director Busick about the concerns regarding sequencing, and it was part of the reason I requested the train miles. I'm hoping we still can get that, not to be provocative, not to assert that those are the only things we should consider in deciding, but it should be one of the factors. The amount and quality of service that's already in place and has been in place as one factor in considering if we have to make that painful choice about sequencing, or if we get to, I guess I should say, I still think we ought to consider that as one legitimate element, because just the way things have worked out, the majority of service has gone to the south, if you talk about train service, or rapid transit too.
Okay, thank you. Director Broom, I'll let you get the last word.
I stepped up for a couple of minutes, so maybe I missed this, but now that this report is completed, what is the plan for disseminating the report and the information and trying to bring some leadership to determine whether any of this is feasible and how it should move forward? Because I hate to see things be developed and just simply put on the shelf. I think that's a disservice to the people that spend all this time compiling this information, and it's a disservice, to us as a board to not follow up, on something that's obviously been promised, and we need to deliver, but not 2050 timeframe.
Mr.
Yes,
Chair.
Mr. General Manager.
Yep, thank you. So actually, there's a lot of interest in this report. I've had requests from stakeholders to send it to him, and I have, along with a Q&A. And I think it provides for the district a great opportunity to have just an expanded dialogue of where we are with the program, and especially when we talk about funding and turning around that conversation in terms of as I think it was Director Lubow that mentioned, on being part of a transportation funding initiative as opposed to being not wanting anybody to associate with us because of where we are with the Fast Tracks program. And actually, I think as we look at the variety of different scenarios, I've had some very good conversations with elected officials so far. The encouraging aspect is when we look at the scenarios under 3, where we look at just a very moderate increase of what we can accomplish in the time frame that we can accomplish. I had a conversation yesterday with an elected that said, I'd certainly like to see the end line finish, so let me know how I can help this. And I'd like to see more rubber tired service. So how can I be supportive of this? So I think what this report does is it allows us to really actively engage in those conversations, especially for me as I go around the district and talk to various stakeholders and do presentations and engage our public and our communities. So it will be a living document. I can't recall, did we post it, Bill, on the website yet? If we haven't, we will, and we'll get that information out.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our updates this evening. We will go on to other matters if anyone has any other matters. Chairman Tisdale, you have some other matters for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note, for the sake of the record, that the expense policy amendment that was discussed, I believe, 3 weeks ago, has been withdrawn and will not be coming forward at this meeting or at any time in the future. The issue that was addressed therein, now having been examined and explored, has had a light shown upon it, and there is not any concern that there will be any issues with that going forward. Sunlight cures so many issues. It was never a policy aimed at any one director. I want that understood, but in any event, it will not be going forward. The second point under other matters is to note, as the chair mentioned earlier, Transit Watch. Transit Watch is an app that provides for safety and security for everyone on our buses, on our trains, at our stations, on the platforms. If you use Transit Watch, you'll never ride alone. we had an exceptionally dramatic display of the impact of Transit Watch. And we are delighted that Director Walker is here to tell the tale. Not that he's going to tonight, but I'm just saying that he's here with us because he did appropriately and adroitly use Transit Watch to communicate with our Transit Police Department 8 days ago in a situation that was fraught with danger and potential harm to our riders, none of which occurred by virtue of Director Walker's actions and our transit police working also in conjunction with the Denver Police Department. So just really, folks, please download the Transit Watch app. Keep it handy. Know that you can use it, because we know it works. And thanks very much to Fox News, Channel 2, Channel 31 here in Denver for highlighting that and doing a story on that and promoting Transit Watch. As I said, you'll never ride alone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Those are my two other matters.
Thank you very much. I don't see anybody else has any. Our next meeting is, Director Lubow, sorry, I didn't.
Yes, I didn't press the button, so sorry. Thank you. I just wanted a couple of comments. One, about that expense policy that was dropped, that issue. I'm really glad it was dropped, and frankly, I would hope not to see something like that again, personally. So I'm just glad that we're moving forward from that. The other thing is this City of Golden letter that we got at our desks, and it just intrigued me because it mentioned that, hey, we corresponded with the board before, we had some concerns, and we haven't heard back from you. And I'm thinking, well, you know, that's a reasonable thing to expect, and maybe we need to think of a policy of if a city corresponds with us, that we respond back, and maybe it's worth discussing offline how to do that. That's it. Thank you.
Yes, General Manager.
Mr. Chair, thank you. On that City of Golden, we'll check on that because we track all these letters and we typically do develop a response to them. And I'm trying to recall whether we did to this one or not, but we'll work through that tomorrow at Senior Leadership Team.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Director Minton.
Yes, I was going to answer the question Director Folska asked about the West Line, because that is this was a really big packet, 439 pages. The ridership is in here on page 163, but it's buried right in the middle. West Line predicted for the year 2025 would be 31,200 to 36,500. And, you know, this has always puzzled me. It makes calculations so hard. When we do weekday ridership, and I want to just split it out by the months, days of the month. So, you know, if I look at the West Line and I divide it by 20 days out of May's ridership, that puts us at 16,100. But that's not accurate because we got weekday ridership. Then you're going to get down more to 14,000. So why do we have to do that?
In terms of federal funding requirements and things like that, they look at daily ridership and projected annual ridership as their two key measures, and their daily ridership is weekday. So those are just common metrics that we do use. Our current ridership, I believe, is reported in the questions and answers that were presented new tonight as average weekday. So that does provide you a direct comparison for our weekday, excluding Saturday, Sunday, and holidays.
Yeah, and that one, which, yeah, my screen won't flip, and it's not going to flip fast enough for me. That's in there also, but I think Director Folsa was asking about the 2012 early projections.
2003 original projections.
That's the number I gave you then. Yeah, because it was a report that was signed by all the RTD board members at that time, 2003, 2004, sent on to Dr. Cog. It's like the official original. But as you mentioned, Mr. Van Meter, the updated numbers are towards the end of this very large packet also. Yeah. Okay. And then I just did want to comment on the City of Golden. I generally do keep pretty good communication with the City of Golden. And this issue, they seem to have some confusion about what's going on. Number one, they've always been regional out there. They were not handpicked just to be the only station on the West Line that was regional. And then when we, and I'll try to keep my temper down, when we went through the fare policy change in 2015 and spent a year and a half going out to the public over and over and over and over and over and over. And we said, okay, let's make all the rail, except for the airport, I believe, one cost. Boulder came in and said, this is not fair to us. City of Golden jumped on and said, that's right, it's not fair. And all of a sudden, our single fare went away. And we went to distance. So they brought this upon themselves, as far as I'm concerned. They were always regional. And if we want to talk about being fair, there are other places on the R line and others that are regional fares. They are not singled out. And I have explained that to the city manager. I've explained that to the mayor. And, you know, if we want to go into this discussion, number one, we don't do it now. We're going to be doing it. I won't even be on the board when we go to have this discussion. So if y'all want to do it, fine. But that's the history on this. And I think this is going through our GMR process. But I will be happy to write another letter or speak to them personally. So if you'd like to give me a status on where we're at with this, so I can explain to them that the Saturday change does not go hand in hand with amending them being a regional stop. And what are we going to do about Peggy's, you know, Conifer area and Evergreen? Because they're regional and they're just right up the hill. So where do we end this? All right, now I'm done with my rant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. We will, yes, we will meet again next month, August 13th, and we will adjourn this meeting.